And there's the church at Smyrna. Write this. These are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and who came to life. I know your affliction, I know your poverty, even though you're rich. I know the slander on a part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. I want to talk about this particular message because it's been used way, way too often in the history of the church to justify anti-Semitic behavior. Well, let's start by saying that the person who wrote the Revelation of John was a Jew. How do we know that? Well, what I'm told, and I can't necessarily tell it for myself, but what I'm told is his Greek really stinks. All right? This is not his native tongue. This is somebody who is a Hebrew of Hebrews, who is operating from that place. And so this is actually a debate that's going on within one religion at the time. This is not Christians versus Jews. And so there are synagogues that are also under pressure, just as these little churches are under pressure from the economic isolation to the physical persecution. And they split apart and they drive themselves apart out of fear. And he's saying, you don't be afraid. Don't live out of that fear as to what you may suffer. But now, now that we're apart, and I guess we can't put that back together yet, I wonder actually if the synagogue that kicked us out might have something to offer us right now. Fear. What inoculates us? What gives us strength to be able to deal with the fear that we might have to boldly step forward? I had the honest privilege to attend a bris, the Jewish rite of circumcision, this week. Remember Rabbi Mark Goffney, who preached here? It was his little boy on the 8th day. And there were about 10 of us. One of the cousins was there. When she found out I was a Presbyterian pastor, I think she about fainted. But then she said, do you know Rabbi Haneke? Doug Haneke is the pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And yeah, I know Rabbi Haneke. I was okay then. But at this ceremony, it was, I don't want to get too graphic, but there was a mohel there, the person who performs the circumcision. He had on a lab coat with, embroidery, that certified mohel, and there were 2 other rabbis in the place, and there were words said and prayers said in the midst of this ceremony. The mother was freaking out. But the other mothers said, yeah, it's like this. You'll be all right. At the end of it, we all gathered together around the table, and each person in the circle gave a blessing to that child. And by the end of it, I thought, this child has been identified and touched by the Spirit and can bring life into the world. This is a ritual that's been going on for 3,000 years. Gives you a sense of who you are so that you can stay the course, though you might be afraid. All I could think is all those passages in Paul about the circumcision party, and you shouldn't have to be circumcised. And that's true. God's going to love you whether you are or not. But I thought that there was a kind of richness to the ritual that inoculates against fear. I mean, you know what we do? We drop some water on the kid. And frankly, we do it if we have, maybe just one grandparent who's willing to bring the child once a year. It's not the kind of identification, the kind of ritual that carries us forward. I'm not sure what to do, but I know we have work to do. I know that sometimes we're afraid. So let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Then there's the angel of the church at Pergamum. These are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword in his mouth. I know where you're living, where the throne of Satan is. And I know that you've put up with persecution. One among you was killed. But I've got a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols. Well, what's the big deal? Maybe none. It's just that they were living in a community where there were dozens of temples all around them. We've actually dug up most of them, archaeologists have. And it's as though they were living in this community. They were isolated. They were kicked out of the economic life because they couldn't worship in the bank, which is the temple. And maybe they just felt like they needed to take in some of what others had to offer. They took a little bit from this religion, maybe a little bit from that religion. I wonder if some of that doesn't go on around us. I get to believe what I believe. It's funny about the Christian faith, or really any faith, any theology. We have a tendency to overreach. We make claims to the truth, but don't stand up. That's the trick with theology. We're talking about that which naught can be said about. I mean, God, we're talking mystery. And yet we make claims that you don't quite hold enough water, and so people look at them, and they say, oh, well, that's not true, and then they can toss the whole thing off. Doesn't that happen in your relationships? If you're talking to your spouse, and you don't like what the spouse is saying, and you find one little flaw where they have overreached in their argument, well, that justifies your being able to dispose of the truth they have to offer. One wonders if that isn't what goes on here. You just dispose of the truth that you're not responsible to a tradition that will hold you accountable, obligated, to be connected to and transformed by the Spirit of God. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches, and then we go to Thyatira. Well, now they seem to have moved beyond sort of picking and choosing what they're going to think about God, and they've decided to pick and choose about how they're going to act. Ethics. So they tolerate a woman named Jezebel who calls herself a prophet and beguiles them, and they practice fornication, and so on and so forth. Okay? It's as though they're not responsible.